Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. I'm really excited about today's guest. He's an entrepreneur. He's going to talk to us about Vansanity and CloudMedSpas. He's got a really interesting proposition that we just talked about. Ignacio Fanlo, and I'm happy to welcome him to the show. Ignacio, welcome.
Hey, Christopher, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Now we're right after Thanksgiving, belly's full, excited about the holidays, ready to go. Ready to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to get back in the swing of things and finish the year out strong. So tell people about, your background, your story, and we'll get right into Cloud Med Spas and what you do.
Yeah. So I've been either a founder or C-level executive for five startups. One was very successful. We went public with Goldman Sachs and sold it to eBay. One was okay, and then a couple of misfires, if you will, a couple failures, but you learn the hard way, I guess. Anyway, the origin story for CloudMedSpas is really a pretty interesting one. I was watching the Academy Awards with some friends, and it was an anniversary show. So they were showing clips 75 years ago, 50 years ago, 25 years ago. And people were making comments about people's skin and hair and their teeth. And boy, it struck me like really clearly that there was this line of what is acceptable, not just in Hollywood, but among society, American society, of your personal aesthetic. And it was just a one-way street, up, and to the right, and more, harder and harder. And then, at a relatively simultaneously, I looked over and there was a young adult taking some selfies with friends, and I was like, oh my God, the next generation is going to have even more pressure because they're taking so many pictures of themselves, 100 times or more than I did at their age. And it was putting enormous scrutiny on themselves because they'd see themselves in these pictures and in social media. And it would be like, wow, you are going to really scrutinize yourself physically. And Zoom has extended it as well. So I started looking and I said, well, let me look at some areas like hair care, teeth, dentistry, medical aesthetics. And a really interesting thing popped off the page when it came to hair care. And it was the fact that more than 90% of the locations had transitioned to a rental model. They had no W-2 employees. And I was thought, well, that is just crazy. I knew that there was this, follow your hairstylist around movement, but I didn't realize it was that ubiquitous. And so what I came to realize after just a few conversations, more research was, hey, these salons figured out the puzzle that if I market for customers and pay that marketing cost, I should get the customer. But the reality is they weren't their customer. They weren't their customer at all. They were the customer of the stylist who could then move. And it was a really difficult task. So they said, screw this. We're not having employees. We're just going to rent you the chair, have a great time, make some money. We'll be landlords. And I realized that the exact same customer dynamic existed in medical aesthetics. I knew it was a much more difficult proposition. You had state regulations, medical directors, malpractice insurance, expensive devices and capital equipment, and neurotoxins, fillers, controlled substances. But I knew that the margins were so big, the growth rate. I mean, it's a $60 billion, $70 billion industry growing double digits still. It's such a big opportunity, such big margins that if you could put together the right package, you could really attract providers who could make hundreds of dollars an hour. And we've seen it. We've seen it in our two owned and operated locations. And more importantly, we opened the platform up late last year because of a couple podcasts I did, and we got inundated with reverse inquiry. People say, I want to be a franchise. I want this model. It's so much better. I'm so tired of getting customers. They really get attached to an injector, and then the injector goes down the street and gets a better deal, makes an extra $5 or $10 an hour, and that's totally understandable. But meanwhile, the med spa owner has absorbed that marketing cost and gotten very little for it. So they were very excited, and we've offered this platform now to any real medically, I'm going to call it medically appropriate space to be able to monetize. So we have dentists, we have plastic surgeons, we have just regular landlords, we have a wedding business, we have all kinds of different medically or aesthetically pleasing areas that say, wait, I have excess space. I can monetize that space just turning the dial with CloudMedSpas, start the business. You have to find a handful of providers to get critical mass. And then you open up the floodgates for letting people rent your space, get access to these products at wholesale prices. And boom, you've got a really nice business as a landlord. And you're not even, the insurance doesn't touch you if you're not doing the procedures. If all you are is a landlord, you don't have any responsibilities. Each of the providers is their own little LLC, and they have to get their own insurance and their own medical director as needed by the state laws. And they're off to the races too.
Yeah. So interesting. So kind of talk about, you kind of talked about, a little bit how it works. And then, talk about you also have this software. So how does the software fit into this whole paradigm?
Yeah. So when we built out our first location in Boston, we had originally said, maybe we'll do this as a software play. And there must be people out there that are dying for this. But we were like, how do we find them? We really struggled trying to find people who were clearly ready to go to a new paradigm. Maybe I should have done the podcast first, but what got the podcast going is we actually built our own test kitchen, if you will, our own, and operated in Boston. We built out about a little less than about a dozen suites, chairs. We did deals with vendors, and it helped set us up. We understood all the trials and tribulations, the payment processing, the inventory management, the scheduling. We did all that ourselves for our own sake. We, ate our own dog food. We have like 60 or 70 providers now in Boston after several years. Timing was a little suspect. Unfortunately, we opened weeks before COVID hit. So we got, kind of a shot to the solar plexus in terms of initial momentum. It was tough, but we got through it. We've got people doing it. And then I went and did a couple of podcasts a little over a year ago about Vansanity and us being ready to open the platform with the software and the services and all those relationships with vendors, and said, hey, anyone in America, and actually we got calls from Hong Kong and UK and other places too, but anyone that would love to transition to a rental model from the med spa industry, and or they had some space available and they were like, I'm a personal trainer, I'm a dentist, I have appropriate space that's extra, that's just gathering dust, and I can turn it into money, not unlike what happened with Airbnb with the room above the garage. Let's turn that extra room or two in our office into dollars.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how you change the model. Kind of the next question is talk about the people that are signing on to it, how they're addressing the problems. Talk about that.
So these folks have told me, hey, listen, I like a good example is one from Texas. And she said, I got into the med spa. I saw what it was, the growth in it. I saw the needs, and I opened one, and I got caught in this very difficult kind of rat trap where they were spending literally sometimes more than $10,000 a month in marketing for patients, people to come in and get injections and laser treatments. And they would get one or two great employees, and then maybe a handful that weren't so great. But the great ones, they had great technique. They had, a great bedside manner. Patients loved them. They followed them. And there was a term called spa hopping. So these great injectors would say, hey, you know what? I'm getting an offer to go down the street. I can take my patients with me because there's a non-compete. But in many states, it doesn't exist. And you can't stop people from getting a living. And then non-solicit is pretty strict. But the reality is, in a social media world, you're not soliciting your customers. You're not emailing them. You're not sending them a note. You're not calling them. You're just posting on Instagram. And when you post on Instagram and people follow you, they find you. And that's allowed. It's allowed to post about where you are. And now people know you're down the street and they follow you because they've got a relationship with you. So it's really hard for the med spa owner to capture the value that they've created by putting all the pieces together. They can just walk out the door. Again, going back to the hair care example, if you can't beat them, you join them. So you really just say, you know what, I'm going to be a landlord. I'll provide you all the tools, but you're your own boss. Also plays into a lot of other, gig economy, self-employed, control. So everybody wins, and if you will, like the individual provider who's really good wins. The med spa owner provides the right environment for this wins, and we win a little bit by providing the software and services. And it's the alignment of those interests as opposed to fighting each other for like, oh, I paid for the marketing, I want this, you want. It's like, let's align all the interests and everybody wins because there's enough on the table here that everybody ends up with a good experience, including the patients.
One of the questions is, they have a aesthetics practice, or do they need to own a med spa in order to convert to an MSO med spa? Tell people what an MSO med spa is. And
MSO is just a word. In the med spa industry, it does have a bit of a pejorative flavor to it. It just is. It means management services organization. The model I love is Marriott. People think Marriott is a hotel company, but they're not. They're a hotel management company. They only own a handful of hotels. They franchise a bunch, but they manage Ritz-Carlton, Sheraton, Four Points, Renaissance. So they're a management services organization. They're the software and services behind tens of thousands of hotels. And now this platform, we're about to launch something in the coming week or two with semaglutides. And I'm sure you've read about them, these weight loss drugs. And they're not just for weight loss. They are like a miracle drug. I mean, there's reduction in kidney disease, heart disease, alcoholism, drug abuse. I mean, it's incredible, this drug. And we have, if you will, a perfect customer base to market to. So we have hundreds of providers who have thousands of patients. And these are folks that, are clearly looking to take care of themselves. We're not trying to give it to runway models trying to lose 5 pounds. I don't think that's appropriate. But there are a lot of people that, in today's world would be considered overweight or maybe even slightly obese. And they're like, hey, I want to feel better about myself. I would love access to these drugs. And the FDA has, approved the drugs, but it was also given an exemption now for a while to do compound pharmacies. And we have a way with a partner to make this all work really simply. So these providers now have an incremental passive revenue stream that we can say, hey, market this to your patient. We'll take care of all the back end and you get a passive income stream for years. So we're really trying to make it work for everybody. Just tap into this market.
Yeah. And how do you get providers to your MSO location?
Yeah, so that is the responsibility of the MSO owner. So we say to the owner, you have two things. We'll do everything else. You have two things you need to do. Figure out the real estate. You either own it or you could lease it. We've got a couple of people who just said, hey, I love this idea so much. I'm going to go lease new space and use your back-end model. And the other thing you do is you do the real estate. And the second thing you do is get providers. Now, we have a nice playbook that we can give to you, kind of a recipe like open houses, vendor events, employment ads, all kinds of tips and tricks, best practices to acquire your initial providers. And once you get 10, 15 providers, you'll find that 2 or 3, 4 of them, 20% or so, are just killing it, like literally killing it. They're doing a couple neurotoxin, Dysport, and neurotoxin 2 in an hour. They make $1,000 gross. They collect the money directly from the patient for those 2 treatments. Rough numbers. Mm-hmm. They pay $400 for the neurotoxin itself. So that's a net of $600, and then they pay $75 to $100 an hour for the room, and that's it. they put $500 in their 525 in their pocket. They pay for things like, if they do some paid social media marketing, they have to pay their monthly medical directorship fees, whatever that is in the state. Malpractice is about $100 a month in this category. So if you do it right, you can clear several $100s an hour as a provider here. Our canonical examples are nurses that used to work 3 shifts a week of 12 hours, 36 hours a week. They made 50 or 60 an hour, which was about 80 to 90,000 a year. And now they're doing this 10 hours a week, literally 1/4 of the time, making slightly more money, a little over 100,000. It's insane. It's insane. And they have complete, another one of those great things about they have complete control, obviously subject to their patients, but basically complete control of their time and total flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. How do people contact you, follow you, learn more about this, reach out to you, etc.?
So you can get me at sales@CloudMedSpas, the plural.com, or info@CloudMedSpas.com. You can also reach me directly on my phone. I take these because I love talking to the customers. I learn every single time. It's a Bay Area number. I was there, 415-613-2640. Again, 415-613-2640.
Yeah. And for all the audience out there, let's thank Iggy for coming on. It's really interesting. I need to do more research and study. It's because I know a lot of med spa aesthetics is booming. And all of Iggy's resources will be in the links and show notes. And with that, thanks so much for coming on.
All right, Chris, Dr. Lou, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.